Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 76 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me as always, we have my co host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And this week, of course, being the first week of Mythic, is officially the start of the race to World First for Sanctum of Domination. And we're going to be talking about the raid and the race and some of the other changes that went in this week and just kind of like nerding out over our part of the
Yeah.
game. I also think looks kind of like Anam's got the race on in the
Oh
background
yeah.
there.
If
Yeah,
you're watching live, I've got
nice.
limit on in the background, so
Nice. So we'll know if they kill it in the
we
middle of
will.
the
We will. You'll
stream.
hear it here probably second. You're probably watching the main stream anyway. So when you
Yeah.
watch the audio or listen to the audio version of this,
Yep.
you'll get to relive it again. So
Yeah. But yeah, so before we get into Race to World First stuff, though, we have a few hot fixes from this week that we want to get through before we really launch into the main topic.
yeah, so just a handful of hotfixes. So not as crazy as it was last week. And a lot. Well, maybe as crazy. A lot of the hotfixes were two bosses. So we'll talk about those probably more when we talk about the actual race and what we've seen. But outside of Sanctum and some of the other things that happened, there were a handful of other sort of tuning changes. A couple of ones are actually pretty big.
Mhm.
So first up is coming to 9.1. There was a really big hotfix to two of the lieutenants
Yeah,
in Mythic Plus. The fire guy, which I forget, it's Siderator or something or other.
Arcolath.
Yep, his melt soul, which is a debuff he places on two targets randomly, which normally increases fire damage taken by 100%, was halved. So now it's only increases fire damage taken by 50%.
Yep.
So a little less deadly there. But actually, the bigger one is to Oros Coldheart, which was the Frost guy, and basically the debuff he puts on one player, which sort of puts a circle around them, and they take massive amounts of damage. They no longer take massive amounts of damage.
Well, they take less massive amount. It's a what 25% nerf.
Yeah, yeah, which is, I mean, this is, I think, the second iteration of nerfs for this ability
Okay.
after its initial placement on PTR. So before it was like, if you're a healer and you heal anyone else other than the person with the debuff, the person with the debuff dies. Um, so then they made it so like, well, you can maybe heal every other global can be put into someone like who
Like the
doesn't have the
tank.
debuff.
Like the
Yeah, like
tank.
the tank. And now with this recent nerf, I mean, I will tell you, I've run probably 6 or 7 Mythic pluses already this week. All around the 15 or so range, so nothing super high.
Yeah.
But it felt much like honestly, there are certain pulls where I would ignore the person with the debuff just because of the class they were. Like, and if they have
Yeah.
defensive up, it's pretty easy. So the only interesting thing I noticed about the debuff, and I don't know if it was a range thing or just a like targeting thing, but whoever gets the debuff the first time generally got every debuff after that. So
Really.
yeah, and distinctly remember like regardless of who it was mostly like I ran with a couple warlocks. So like if the warlock got it, the first debuff, they would always get the ones after that. And then yeah, if it was on a different sort of range class, I think I ran with like a boomkin, they got all of them once. So it was a little bit weird there. It didn't really seem to jump around, but no melee got it, which I'm happy with.
Yeah.
I don't have to dodge around. So yeah, just a couple of hot fixes there to some of the Mythic Plus lieutenants. Nothing I noticed in the dungeons themselves. So it's really just these couple of nerfs
Yeah. I think
to the lieutenants.
at this point, a lot of the base like 8 point or 9.0 dungeons are actually in a pretty good state. Been doing a bunch of keys to gear up this week and last, and I don't think even being tyrannical. What was it? Tyrannical last week, right?
Yep.
There weren't any bosses that I noticed like being super outliers, at least at the 15 range. I definitely felt the scaling changes from the patch
Yeah.
this week in Fortified, tanking it. It's some real spooky stuff still, but we get another 15 item levels and it'll even out. So
Yeah, it all sort of even out there. But yeah. I mean, Mythic Plus seemed pretty easy. I think the biggest thing to your point is this is scaling. That stuff seemed to take a little bit longer than it has in the past, but that's just because I think people are slightly undergeared for the 15s that they're doing. Um, so yeah. So then next up we have a couple of hot fixes to two things basically to Tazavesh. which is the new mega dungeon,
Yep.
and then to one of the shards of domination. So we'll go over the Tazavesh nerf first. This is to the, I believe it's the third boss you do. It's the mailroom boss, basically.
Depends on the order,
Uh,
but yes, I think the typical order has it third. Actually, regardless
mhm,
of which way you go, you either do the menagerie first or you do the band boss first.
yeah, yeah, and then he's yeah male guys in the middle, and then you would cross either way from there
Yeah,
to do the sub boss. But yeah, he's one of the I guess yeah he's actually could be the second if you ran right to him. But yeah, so in in his hard mode encounter, which was where this bug I think mostly presented itself, was the little bombs that he puts on the ground. You basically in normal mode, or I guess non-hard mode, one person can pick it up, run it to the chute, throw it in the chute, and you're fine. It won't explode and do damage. The problem was in hard mode, whenever you pick one of those up, you can't move. So essentially, you have to make like a daisy chain and throw it to a person who eventually can throw it in the chute and get rid of it. The bug was though that as soon as you threw it, it acted like you dropped it and exploded immediately on the group. So the strategy to do hard mode mailroom was essentially to not move, put everyone in one spot, and do enough damage
to
so that
kill
you
the
killed the boss
boss.
before it killed you.
Which even
Um,
with like relatively scuffed groups, you just bloodlust and hit all of your CDs, and we didn't have any issues. Like this is in Castle Nathria gear still for the most part during this last week.
yeah.
We didn't have any real issues doing that. Um, they actually don't have that much health, so this is still probably the easiest strategy for doing the boss. Like don't think you actually want to do this mechanic, even with the
No.
fix. Um, if you're going in and you're like primarily, 215, 210 gear, then you probably do need to do this because I don't think you're going to be able to kill it. But
Mhm.
if you're like around Mythic Casanatria eye levels, then you can just press Bloodlust and go to town.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how we killed it last week. Is how we killed it this week. So this week was noticeably easier. I think last week we had like two bombs go off um before we killed it. So it was a little sketchy at the end. But yeah, mostly it was yeah. It was a good I mean, it's a good change. Now you can do the fight you're supposed to
Yeah,
with the way you're supposed to, but if you're doing hard mode, there's no point in actually doing it the way you're supposed to.
yeah,
Um so yeah, so that's the mailroom update there. Then they also did do a hotfix to Shard of Zed, one of the domination
yes.
shards. So Shard of Zed, if you're not familiar, because I actually just looked this up, so I was saying the right thing. This is the one where anytime you use an ability, you can put a aura on either you or a friendly target that basically allows them to drain health from any enemies around them.
Yeah,
And the problem with this ability was that it was procking from everything.
including
You mount
invisibility potions.
yeah, you could proc it during invisibility potions, which means you ran over mobs while invisible, the aura would trigger and then pull you out of invisibility. You could proc it while you were mounting. You could proc it from casting a fishing pole or casting fishing. Basically, proc from anything. What they did was they made a change that now only allows it to proc from class abilities, basically removing it procking from like items or other things that aren't
Yeah,
like just spells and damage abilities.
I've
So
heard it's still not perfect because there are things like specifically for rogues where it might proc off of sprint. So if you press stealth and then shroud and then press sprint, you might get the buff.
mhm.
So it's not perfect, but it's much improved.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. For sure. So that's a pretty a very at least an updated change. I know that's super annoying. They've had some other things too like this
Yeah,
where things would proc randomly. I think one of the essences used to do this, right?
yeah.
Back in BFA.
There
So
was definitely stuff so that the tank miner essence null barrier, you could if you took magic damage prior to going into invisibility,
mhm.
then the barrier would explode when it
Oh,
expired
well,
and
that's not good.
break you out of stealth if it hit anything. And you can't cancel that buff because they wanted to keep people from cheesing it. So you actually
Yeah,
couldn't like cancel it early as part of an invisibility macro or anything. You just had to wait for it to explode.
that's awesome.
Um,
That's
good
awesome.
times. Good times.
Love that. Love that. All right. So yeah, so those are sort of I think the at least in-game updates changes that have been made. But we have a couple more last week things before we start talking about the race specifically. First up we have an interesting tweet which probably sort of bleeds into the race for world first discussion, but it does
Yeah.
come we'll talk about it just briefly and we can sort of bring this up maybe further down, but it comes from Perfecto, which he is a rogue on Echo's team, and essentially he tweeted out that he should probably, or that he doesn't know why he traveled to Switzerland to be with the team, because he's not gonna be able to play. Not because he's sick or anything happened. It's just that he didn't get his 3-set shard set from the
Yeah.
Domination gem, so he didn't get 3 gems of the same set, which essentially to the folks at the level that Echo limit, even the other top 10 world guilds are doing, basically means you can't play. You just don't do enough damage for what they need,
For
because of us running
context,
sets up.
for context on where like why this is suddenly a problem where it wasn't really one that we talked about during PTR. On PTR and even now, like the rank 1 of the set bonus is fairly impactful, but it's something where like it's like any other form of gear luck, right? If you get unlucky with gear, you're going to do less damage. You get better trinkets, you're going to do more damage. It was on par with that kind of regular old gear luck.
Mhm.
Um, then they added 4 more ranks of the set bonus.
Yeah,
So currently, I have rank. I was very lucky. I got my blood set finished this week. And rank 3 of that is doing 12% of my damage.
it's ridiculous. Yeah, they're just so
It's
strong.
it's incredible. Let me actually pull up what the actual like DPS number is because it's something ludicrous.
Yeah,
Um, it's not just like oh lol tanks do no damage. It's actually doing just huge quantities damage, and this isn't even the good one for most DPS, right? Like if you're a rogue, you want the unholy one. So Bloodlink was doing 560 DPS
yeah, just
by itself, and
eh,
that's not counting like the proc effects from the gems themselves. That's just the set bonus.
yeah. Yeah, which I mean, from my point of view, I think it sucks for Perfecto, like, or for really for anybody who like sort of raids at this level and you're at the mercy of RNG, right? In terms of like getting the items that you need to move forward. But like this is no different than like any other sort of like loot luck, right? Like we've had these sort of conversations before about like, or these sort of tweets before about how like I've killed this boss 12 times in 14 different splits and didn't get the gear I needed. And it's like, well, like the other option here is to just put everything on a vendor and you buy it, right? And like I think that gets at the core of like an RPG mechanic. Like my I don't have a problem with this, and I think it's sort of like complaining about a core mechanic of an
I think
RPG,
I think it's an
like
issue of
that.
scale more than anything else. Like to use corruption as an example, corruption acquisition wouldn't have been a problem if it were very easy and even expected to have a bunch of small incremental upgrades over a period of weeks, right? Like
Mhm.
it was the issue with corruption primarily as far as acquisition went is that the combination of the randomness and the fact that some of them were hugely massively valuable, like on par with the set bonuses by themselves, that made it really frustrating. And
Yeah.
so this is again uh a problem of scale. Like
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
if these did less damage to the point that like if you got your good trinket instead, or you got better luck on weapons instead, you know, then if it were competitive with that, then I don't think people would really be complaining like this. It's the fact that these set bonuses are so overwhelmingly powerful compared to any other avenue of gear. Um, so even if you do get lucky somewhere else, like there's people in my guild that had good luck on trinkets that already have their best trinkets for the tier, but they are looking at probably several more weeks to get their unholy set because they just have no sockets or one socket
Mhm.
and plus the rep one, but they have to get their set one and they have to get one or two more unholy gems and things like that. Because that's so impactful, it feels bad to have lost on that RNG even though they won the trinket lottery.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think my only counterpoint to that is that like the other option is that the set bonuses are not impactful at all. Right, or they're like mediocre increases in power, and then you feel like like it feels less like a system that matters, right? Like
uh,
I'd rather them overtune at least the sets themselves, make them
mm,
something you want versus undertune them, which is what conduits are, right?
yeah, okay,
Like
all
that's
right,
the idea.
that's
Is like there's
there's a
never
balance though,
a
right? Because like I
and
think
I
this
agree there's a balance,
this
but
set
like if
bonus
they
is
don't
better than my legendary. Like it is straight up better by a large margin than my legendary.
right, but
Um,
the other option was that the set bonuses are less powerful and you don't care about. Like that's what I'm saying is I'd rather
but
if
like
Blizzard was going to eke on either side of the here's your balance line and they can either be under or overtuned, I'd rather them lean towards overtuning so they matter. Like so they're
I would
fun to
rather them
get.
not. I would rather them lean towards undertuning them because when you have this kind of very, for one thing, it's time gated access because you only get 10. You get 10 shots at looting gems each week. You can get 1 gem per boss for the most part.
Yep.
Um, and there are 10 boss kills regardless of difficulty, so you got 10 shots. You need to get 3 specific gems. You need to get 1 specific item to turn on the set, plus 2 more items, one of which you can get for a rep vendor. So it's not really that bad. But there's like a bunch of hoops to jump through, and it's the level of impact they have right now. This feels like corruption.
I would I
I'm
would
getting rank
disagree.
ones because I have the blood set and other people don't.
But my only point, the biggest difference I think from the corruption piece, right, was the acquisition of gear here is very finite. Meaning, once you get the helm, you're
Yes.
fine. Once you
Yes.
get 3 sockets, you're fine. Once you get the gems, you are fine.
Right.
The problem with corruption was you not only did you get the item, but then you need to get the specific corruption rolled on that item.
Yeah.
Right? So, like or you ended up in your case, right, where you're wearing, like, World Quest level bracers because they have
Yes.
TD
For
on
the
them,
entire
right,
tier. That was
to kill
fantastic.
N'Zoth,
I
right?
still have those in
And
my
so, like,
bank.
where I think that individual power, I think, is a problem,
Yes,
but I
I
think the
agree with
fact that
that.
you have a set that you need to together, and it's not like they're asking you to, like, well, you
Well,
need to get the helm at this level
kind of what
to get
I'm saying is like this feels like corruption because we are once again in the world of the haves and the have-nots, right? This isn't something like in patch 9.0, you got to pick your covenant. You had great control over your legendary as long as you were doing your weekly stuff. You got that huge power bonus from getting your legendary upgrades. There were
yeah.
other large power bonuses like trinkets, which I have definitely complained about before. But generally speaking, the difference between the best and the second best trinket, or even the fifth best trinket, is not 10% DPS. It's like 2% DPS, right? Um,
Yeah.
Whereas right now, going from 0 to doing 12% more DPS, or as I had on our best eye pull, 15% more DPS because I had the blood set. That's just like there is this feeling of like the haves versus the have-nots.
Yeah,
Um,
but my I guess my only I mean, not counterpoint, but my only observation there is basically, like, you're only a have-not until you get the item, right? Like, you're not always gonna be a have-not. Where in
right.
the case of corruption, you could always have been a
Oh
have-not.
yeah, that's
Until they put the
definitely.
vendor there,
I'm not like
like
I guess corruption maybe puts this on a makes it corruption is definitely worse. Like I want to be clear on
yeah.
that. Corruption is so much worse than this,
Mhm.
but there are parallels and there are
Yeah,
things to understand in my opinion about this system that are the same kind of feels bads from corruption, right? It felt bad to get unlucky on corruption and be one of the
yeah.
have-nots. In the same way that right now, it feels bad to be one of the have-nots. And yeah,
Ye
in my guild, in 2 weeks, everybody's gonna have their set bonus pretty much regardless. And I
Mhm.
think that's where like right now this system feels bad, and I think they could have designed it in a way where it wouldn't have. But in 2 weeks, it's not gonna matter.
Yeah, and I don't know if it does because like, if you look back at even, like, tier sets, right, and the acquisition there, like, you would have had a similar situation where you would have had people
These are
who
more
got 4
powerful than
set.
any tier sets. Like
Well, but I mean, regardless of the power level, right?
I
The
mean, the power
tuning
level
of the
matters, though.
I don't think it does in terms of acquisition, and I think you can break those 2
It
concepts
does.
up.
No, I don't think you can because, like, okay, let's take mounts for example. There are some extremely difficult to get mounts, right? But they don't contribute to power. I don't care about them. Like, there are people that
Well,
do care
no,
about them, but they don't contribute to power, so I don't care.
but I think that's a so so what I mean by the acquisition piece, right, and breaking up from the power of it is that we wouldn't be talking about this. Like, so I agree, the power matters, but we wouldn't be talking about this in terms of have and have nots if the actual power increase was minor at best.
Yeah, exactly.
And at that point, the system wouldn't matter. So
Yeah,
I
it
think
would.
like no, it wouldn't.
Well,
I mean, it'd be like conduits. Like it'd be like, oh great, I have a 226
but
conduit versus
okay, okay,
213 conduit. Like,
that's extreme, right? That's extreme.
but
Conduits are extremely undertuned. Like there's a big gap, and something like Bloodlink, I think, is a great example because it's very easy to do the math on Bloodlink and see how much damage it does.
Right.
You don't. There's
Right, but I mean, I don't wanna go like, my biggest point is that regardless of their power, I think the acquisition of them is fine. That's my only thing, is that I think the fact that you have to go through this idea of, like, randomly pulling these things out
Mhm.
as in course of just playing an RPG game, right?
Yeah,
And the fact that it's not gated behind like, the reason that I think again, corruption, I agree, is probably a good analogy system. Like, the reason corruption was bad was because the acquisition was bad. Like, the fact that they were powerful, that you could wear a 184 whatever item, right, and wear it for most of expansion, that's a broken system from a power side of things. But
yeah,
I think the acquisition side sucks because you couldn't ever upgrade that, right?
yeah,
Like, or you could never get better than that. And I think the idea here is that there's a finite amount of gear you need to essentially get or pull or
yeah.
pull the slot machine enough and you'll get it, right? Where with the corruption side of things,
Yeah, you would never.
you could never
Realistically,
get
you were
that,
never
right?
getting your bits from random drops. Like there was the
Right.
one guy. Do you remember that armory link that was going around of the guy that had like 8 different gushing wounds on back before they nerfed it because gushing wounds was balanced around it being rare.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there was that, and then like there's still the other side of it, other side of like the RNG side of things, which is like you have Titan Forging and War Forging, which aren't at the same level of this, but they're very similar. Where like you could go an entire expansion and always be slightly less powerful than everybody else because
Yeah,
you couldn't get a Titan Forge pair of gloves or whatever it ended up being.
I
That's
think.
what I'm saying is like my point is that from an acquisition perspective, I think it's fine. Like I didn't make a set today. I've gotten 5 gems and 1 gem socket, and the gem socket I did get was off of the
Rep
time walking
vendor.
box.
Oh,
No, the not
okay.
even the rep, the time walking box. I could buy I guess I got the vendor too. So I guess
Yeah,
I have 2. But like and gem wise, I've gotten nothing. I've gotten 1 unholy gem, 1 bad frost gem, and 2 blood gems.
yeah,
So it's like from my perspective, I'd probably be one of the more vocal people, or should be, right? Just based on the fact that like I did get none of the gem sets I wanted. I got shoulders with my Dom stock, which I don't even want. Like I'd rather have helm because I need to
yeah,
activate
yeah,
unholy. But for me, I'm fine with that level of RNG being in the game because I know that I will eventually be done. I will
yeah,
eventually be done when I get my mythic helm. I'll be done when I get my second or when I get all my Dom socket gear from a mythic level perspective.
yeah,
And I'll be done when I acquire all the gems, which maybe takes me 2 weeks. So like this whole like that's why Perfecto's tweet like it's fine if you're at the top world, but like anybody who isn't rating in one of the top 10 guilds right now,
yeah.
like
Like we're not.
you're complaining about playing an RPG. Which if you don't want to play an RPG, go play like a game where they have a cash shop where you can buy all the cosmetics you want, you can look good, and all the guns shoot the same or whatever you like, all the balls shoot the same, whatever it ends up being, right?
I so
That's my
I
point. That's
maintain
only my point.
that the acquisition is better than corruption, but worse than tier sets.
Well, because you had to acquire 2 things versus one.
Well,
Like from a
no, tier sets you need
perspective.
4 things. Like you need to get
Well,
4 pieces out of 6 in order to get your 4 set turned on.
right, but from a gem perspective, you need 2 separate acquisition sources, right, for gems. You need to actually get the gem, and then you need to get the piece to
So
put the
the
gem in.
reason it's not about number of things for me, it's actually about the incremental nature of it, right? This is the sets here are very binary. You either have it or you don't. First,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of things that you can get to drop that don't actually contribute towards that goal. Like there's, you know, pieces of the system that you can have drop for you that actually do nothing. Things like getting
yeah,
frost gems. Frost gems, there's the absorb one that's very good and the others are worthless.
yeah,
And corruption had that same kind of thing where there's corrupt. You would get your new corrupted piece, and it would be worthless because it was movement speed, or
yeah.
whatever. Um, versus like a tier set where if you get a tier piece, it's always a tier piece. It's always inching you towards that set bonus, and you only need to get you need to get 4 times. You need to get the tier piece, a tier piece, and then you're done. And then
No,
you can
I
work on
agree.
like getting the right 4 pieces, but every piece that you get contributes towards that goal of getting your tier set together. Versus this, where like, you know, you kill a boss and you see the loot pop up and you get excited, and then it's a frost gem, and you go, God damn it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would agree that from if we're strictly comparing it to tier sets, I think the acquisition there much better from a tier set perspective, right? I don't think
So
this system uh comes close, like isn't as good as that. I
yeah,
my point is that like people complaining about the acquisition part of it just seems like they just and I'm not saying this is you. This is sort of probably bucketizing people and we're generalizing when I shouldn't, but it is like you're complaining about playing an RPG that has random loot jobs. Like it's just like it's part of the way the game plays, and like I have less of an issue there. Um, and I'm fine with them being powerful because like it's fun to eventually get them and like see your power level
Yeah.
increase. Like it's maybe like viewing it from someone who like you, like you've gotten it already, so you get to see that increase immediately first, right? But like eventually every player gets to have the moment you had, which was like quit my third gem, do 12% more damage. This is awesome. Like every player gets to have that moment versus if it's like corruption or you know what I mean, if it was like corruption, not every player got to have that moment. Or if they did, it was like,
Buy
oh, I
a
went to the
BOE.
vendor
Yeah.
and grab and like I bought a BOE or I went to the vendor and did horrific visions, or like killed like bled my through my eyes enough in horrific vision so that I could then buy the item and like attach it to some piece I had, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
like which is less exciting. Like it's just that's just
Yeah.
like not fun at
Absolutely.
all. But
Absolutely agree on that point.
yeah,
Um,
but I mean like from my perspective, cool that they're powerful, cool that they have incremental power, right? That now that there's a reason to upgrade gems
so
beyond rank 1. So,
I actually think that I never thought I would say this, but I actually think that it should have taken more time to rank up your gems. Um, because
oh
right
yeah,
now
it's super cheap.
it's so cheap. Like as soon as I got my 3 pieces, I went to the vendor and I was shocked at the prices. I hadn't looked at them yet.
They're 5 each
I
for
was able to go
21 seconds.
immediately to rank 3, go from 0 to rank 3 just on the spot, and
Yep.
get partway through rank 4, like partway to rank 4. Like in oh, so the costs are exponentially increasing. So like next week I should be able to get rank 4, I believe, and then 2 weeks later I'll get rank 5. So it's like another month of drops almost to get
Yeah.
rank 5, but rank 3 is literally twice as good as rank 1.
Yeah. It's a lot of initial power increase, which yeah, I agree. I mean, when I looked at the prices too, because I was like, well, I should hold on to these embers and save them for unholy and I'll wait to see what gems I get. But I was like, it's 5 for the first upgrade? Like, just upgrade everything to rank 2. That way at least I'll have rank 2 everything. And like
Yeah.
yeah, it's just pricing wise, I think they missed the mark there. But yeah, I mean, sorry, I know we've sort of gone on a
Yeah,
tangent of
yeah,
like
yeah.
how good the Sanctum of Domination gem system is, but I think to Perfecto's point, I feel for the guy. I feel like you basically spend a bunch of time setting up, getting ready for this like world first thing to like go with your team and do stuff first, and you basically get screwed by the drop lords, right?
Yeah.
By sort of
And
like
this is something
that
like
side of the equation.
I do think that I do think that this is a legitimate like complaint and problem that could have been avoided if they had designed the system such that the power gain were smoother. You know,
Yeah,
if being lucky and unlucky was a couple percent, and like it can still end up being, a 15% damage increase in a month. You know,
right. Yeah,
it just doesn't need to be for the average case for someone to go from literally 0 to 15% damage increase because they got that one final piece. Like that binary thing of either having all the pieces or not having all the pieces, I think
yeah.
is ultimately the problem.
No, and I'd agree there. I think the initial power boost was probably slightly too high. Yeah, I'd agree to that. And then yeah, smooth it out. I'm down with that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. All right, cool. Well, sorry, Perfecto, that you're riding the bench, my dude. But it looks like your guild's doing okay though. It's a close race, so it's
It
gonna be
is an
fun.
extremely close race.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about it in a second. So we have one more thing, and then we'll actually get to talk about the race and some of the bosses, and that is the Race for World First View on WarcraftLogs, which is a new tool. So like basically, I think I'll say all the major sites. There's two of them, Rare.io and Warcraft Logs. Basically, went a little bit all out for this. Warcraft Logs, if you remember previously, added a competition mode, which didn't let you view guilds logs, but like some of the top guilds, because they do private log, they allowed Warcraft Logs to basically show their best percentage on bosses. So you could see like as guilds kill bosses, like Warcraft Logs would update their top 10. And then they'd show like the best percentage on either a certain boss or just in general how the top 10 are doing, where they're at. What they've since enhanced that with is what they're calling sort of a head to head, or like I don't even know they have a name for it. I guess they're calling it the head to head mode, which is where you can view a certain encounter and basically see the streams of two guilds that are progressing on it. So I think you're showing the Sylvanas encounter
Yeah,
right now, which is of course Echo and Method, or sorry, Echo and Limit. Um, and you can sort of click around they'll show like their roster, who's all in, and you can, and I think any of the ones with a red dot here, if you watching
Yep.
this live.
You
If not, you
can
can sort of click to different viewpoints. It'll seamlessly switch between them. You don't
Yep.
even
So
need a
if you're a
page review.
healer and you want to watch a healer POV, you can go here and click on Dryny or whoever and watch their POV, which is very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very and it works with pretty much any encounter. I think you said it even goes down to like the server level, right? Where you can watch
Yeah,
like 2
so
guilds.
there's this overall race to world first view that shows, everybody progressing in the top 10 range, and
Mhm.
where they are in the instance and information about their pull counts and what their best pull is and all that kind of stuff. So that's very cool. It does also, so if I go to uh this is you, so if I go to my realm, um there's a realm first equivalent of that view basically that shows the different guilds. I don't know why this is showing to Nathrius for our guild, but you can see uh, where people are, even if they do private log like Astral does.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
so it is a very cool wow, yeah, nice to or sire kill. But it is a very cool view just in terms of like being able to view the race, I think, in a different way. So if you want to see like 2 guilds head to head, or I think at the start of the race, I don't think this was fully up and running right when they kicked off,
I
but
think so they did have some upgrades to it during the race, but also I didn't know about the head-to-head thing because you have to select a specific boss. So like right now when you go there, it defaults to Sylvanas because there's 4 different guilds progressing Sylvanas.
mhm.
But previously, it actually showed the overall view, like the progress bar throughout the raid and everybody's full percentages. But now, this is actually a very, very cool way of like taking a quick peek and going like, oh, I want to watch a tank POV. Let me, click now stream.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, they did it is a very, very cool, sort of way to view the race. I mean, to be fair, like, WarcraftLogs sort of positioned probably the best to do this,
Oh yeah,
in terms of just, like, what they have going for them, but yeah, super cool. I thought even previously being able to see, like, how close, different guilds were, without seeing their logs, but, letting that, detail be, public was cool, so one more step now. And I can
yeah,
sort of click around, and they even like have like Maxes and Scripes POVs as like the coaches and stuff like that. So it's
it's
really
very
nice.
cool.
Yeah. All right. Well then I think I guess let's transition into
The
talking about the race for
main
world first.
topic.
Yeah. So I don't know where you want to start. I mean, I was just gonna probably think like let's go through some of the early bosses. They were pretty quick. We can
Yeah,
give maybe our own experience of how we're doing on them, and then sort of what we saw, and then sort of get into probably the first big one's probably Painsmith we get to talk about. But
yeah. Painsmith is the big one to talk about, I think, right now.
yeah,
Um,
yes. So I guess before we do that, like from a personal experience perspective, how are you guys doing from a mythic?
so we are, 1 of 10 right now. We go back in tonight. We
Very cool.
did some polls on the eye, and then we're like, this is going to be a lot easier if we just go clear heroic and come back. And
Hmm.
so we're finishing up heroic, and then going to go back, or yeah, finishing up heroic, and then going back to finish off the eye, and then the 9 is apparently a complete pushover from everything that I've seen. A 3 pull boss
Yes,
kind of thing.
I
Um,
wish that could.
hmm. um, so that's where I expect to be at the end of the night.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome.
but since we do raid tonight, we're not all there yet. But yeah, the eye much harder than is typical for a boss in its position in the raid, where like we're going in with pretty good eye level for it, and it
Hmm.
still does have a very decent damage check in the intermission phases, which is kind of surprising. The other team in my guild, the weekday team, did the limit strat where you like have a bunch of ranged in the middle and they cleave the both. We're doing the
Hmm.
echo strat where you like have the entire raid on one side and they use the harpoons to go to
Oh,
the other side and kill that one, and you get
very
them both
cool.
to like 15%, and then you finish them off at the same time, which has a lower DPS check. So that's just not the kind of thing you have to usually think about for the second boss in the instance.
Yeah. And we're
um
doing the BD or the BD, I don't know if it's BDDG, but Nerfed killed it this way, which is like we swap in the middle. So
okay, yeah,
we take 4 or 5 stacks on one side, and
yeah,
then everybody swaps the other side.
yes, that's what we're doing, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's or not everybody, sorry, we split our rate in 2, and then like one team gets
oh,
the
so
4
you
or 5
go
stacks, and
like,
then like
and then
yeah.
you
Yeah,
literally
10 and 10, yeah, on each side, yeah.
oh,
And
interesting,
everybody swaps, even the tanks, which caused a couple wipes, but
yeah.
it's it's very as a healer, it's not fun because where we swap is right after or right before the second AoE.
Right, so
So
you're
like
moving and
so
then
we're
have to get
moving,
there.
have 5 stacks, have to get there and then top everybody, take the hit, and then top everybody again while the 5 stacks are running out. So
Yeah.
it's not fun. We ended up killing it that way. And I think it's basically just because from a healing perspective, we made a couple of adjustments and like our ultimately people just played better. They didn't drop pools in the middle.
Yeah.
They didn't die to stupid things.
Yeah,
So,
we had
but yeah,
a we were I think actually like relatively close to a kill of the eye, but it was one of those things where like it could have taken us one more pull because we were getting into deeply into intermission 2, but with the way we're doing it, we don't want to use CDs during that. Like raids
yeah,
healer CDs
yeah.
we want to use, but DPS CDs we don't. So it was like unclear if it was something where we were going to survive the initial immediate extermination with where our damage was, or if
Mhm.
we needed to go and do heroic and then come back and then like push out of the intermission like 1 to 2 stacks earlier.
Gotcha.
So we ultimately did go to heroic, but yeah.
Yeah, it's
Also,
a
uh,
extermination is not fun. Not
yeah,
not fun.
we have 3 boomkin. They are all going to press all their CDs during Bloodlust and do 30k DPS for 10 seconds.
I
And
wish we had 3.
the boss is going to die very quickly. I'm expecting us to get to like 5 stacks of immediate extermination.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Interesting. Nice. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and then we did do a couple pulls on the 9, probably like 10-ish or so, I want to say.
Hey,
That
uh,
boss, what?
how many pulls did the Terror take you? Out of curiosity.
One. We one shot it actually, or
Nice.
we might have wiped once. So like one or two,
Yeah,
like 2 times.
we spent 5 pulls on it because it turns out that if nobody's picking defensive powers, the boss actually will kill you.
Yeah, yeah. We made it a point. Like I think, like me, it's either me or the paladin that we have in our guild. Always got the soak one, like the stun immune one.
Right. So
Um.
we
So
had
yeah,
people prioritizing the one that removes debuffs and the stun immune one. But then
yeah,
beyond that, people were doing whatever they wanted, and by and large, ignoring the defensive powers. And the dot that he puts out is actually like a pretty heavy dot, and it will kill people. So when they're taking things that increase their damage but don't do anything for their survivability, and
yeah.
then maybe they've taken some stacks of the magic damage increase, or they've got the fire dot on them, they can die. Turns out. So we went out and refresh and like had a few people refresh their powers. So we went from like 2 unstable forms to 5. So we had more people to soak the fire dot,
Oh, nice.
and people picked some more defensive powers, and then we just easily one shot it. So pro tip: if you're going in on that boss, uh, pick defensive powers. Boss doesn't have a
It's one
damage
of those.
check. Just pick the defensive powers. It'll be real easy. Just don't die. Just
Yeah.
don't die.
Yeah, that boss. Yeah, boss is fun. But yeah, no, I think we had one or two shot it, and then yeah, we worked on the eye. The eye weirdly seems like the type of fight where like if you can just 6 or 7 heal it, just do it because like it's literally just surviving as long as you can. Like that's all that fight is. So
Yeah.
we also had a little bit of trouble with the
There's a
debuffs, but
lot of fights like that this tier, actually.
yeah, we can actually get into some of the other ones that are like that because yeah, there's
So
a
the
lot of just
9,
like
real quick, the 9 we are planning to 6 heal. Um,
oh nice.
because it's also like just live and the boss will die.
Yep.
So like just heal through the dot in phase 2. Don't miss the Armageddon soaks. Get the fragments out, and you will eventually kill the boss. Like it's basically impossible to actually hit the enrage on that.
Yeah. Yeah, we might actually bring 6. We did most of our polls with 5 healers just because it's all we technically have.
Yeah.
So
We
yeah.
have 5 and then a elemental shaman that is comfortable playing restoration. So he's usually
Gotcha.
our 6th player.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. But yeah, so I think I mean, other than those first 3, they're pretty much a joke, and then sort of the difficulty instance really ramps up. So
Yeah.
when I checked last night doing show notes, it was funny. There was actually more kills of well, in terms of difficulty, it's funny. There's more kills of Mythic than 9. It's like almost 200. I wanted to say last night.
Yeah.
Then it drops to like 23 for Soulrender
Yeah.
in terms of Mythic kills. So it's like huge disparity. There was also more Mythic than 9 kills than there were heroic Sylvanas kills last
Yep.
night. I don't know if
No
that's still the
surprise there.
case.
What we
Yeah,
are planning to do is after we kill the 9, we're gonna go back to heroic Sylvanas because we haven't gotten AOTC yet. Um,
yeah. Neither have we. So
so most guilds haven't, like you said. There's very few kills. Like if you're not in the world top 100, you probably do not have AOTC Sylvanas.
yeah. Yeah, so it's yeah, but yeah, the difficulty super ramps up from there and ramps up really it's funny. That's where we get I think our first sort of hot fix notes, which was we'll talk about Soul
Soulrender.
Render first, which
Ooh,
was actually the fifth boss killed. So a lot of guilds killed Remnant first,
yeah.
but to be fair now, Soul Render is probably the easier fourth boss.
Because they what
Um,
reduced his HP by 17% or something.
Reduce it by 17% and then change the way the AoE damage worked in terms of his tick, his dot tick. Reduce that, I think, by almost 40%. I want to say. Well, I
Yeah,
forget the final numbers. They basically reduced it and then also, but reduced it and then also increased its tick rate. So there were the ticks themselves are not as strong.
but
They
there's
just
more of
happen
them.
more frequently. And
That's
then in
the
general, the
second time
damage
this
went down.
expansion they've done something like that. The other time, in fairness, was to a DPS potion, potion of Phantom Fire, was in 9.0. Very low proc rate, but very high damage when it procced, which
Yeah.
led to like huge damage swings. Because if you got 8 procs, you were a god. But if
Yeah.
you got 2, it sucked, or 1, or in some cases, like we have logs where people hit a potion and they just never got a proc.
God. It's awful.
But now it has a much higher proc rate, and each proc has less damage, so it's much more lower variance.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, they also lowered the damage on the chain breaks by like 18 or 17% too. So general his like the damage output from that fight was nerfed heavily.
Yeah,
Basically as Limit was progressing it. I think Limit
they had
and
gone to
Echo
do
are
like
both on it.
heroic splits or something,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
came
I think they
back to
did
it
power
once they
splits.
nerfed it.
Yeah. So now fourth boss there, huge swing in sort of difficulty just based on those couple of changes. Now your fourth boss it's killed. Still looks like a fun fight. I think the
Yeah,
additional ad is pretty cool in terms of like what it does. I think it has the inspire effect, right? So the idea is you want to
Yeah, kind of. So
yeah,
there's two important things. One, it spawns after the other ads. Two, it doesn't break CC that's already on the other ads. So the way that Limit was doing it is you just CC the other 4, burn down the Overlord, and then you do your grips and AoE damage on the other 4. And
gotcha.
so it's like not super complicated to do that. You do need to have people careful not to dot the ads before they get, CC'd. But there's so much CC in the game that works on them. Hex works, Poly works. You're not damaging them before it, so Poly is perfectly fine. Paralysis, of course. The monks are
Yep.
very good at
Uh-huh.
it. Ring of Peace also very good on that fight. Yep.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, so other than the additional ad, not too many different changes from Mythic, but or from Heroic to Mythic. But yeah, generally a very easy boss fight now, just based on the large nerfs that they ended up putting in.
I
So
am no longer gonna call bosses easy because we were talking about like the eye before
oh yeah,
the
true,
patch
that's
went
fair.
live, and then the
Yeah.
eye turned out to be a lot harder than anybody expected.
Yeah. And I think in general the bosses this tier are just they feel you're right, they feel more difficult. Just in yeah,
I,
across the board. I think
and so it's
even even Terragher, I mean, as a
yeah,
first boss is cool, but like you still can't just walk in there and lust and kill it. So
it is very interesting. I feel like some of these bosses were maybe tuned around having domination sets,
yeah,
um, post
fair.
buffs basically. Because if the whole raid has an extra 15% damage from getting their unholy set, right? At like rank 3, it's the eye is suddenly no longer a damage check whatsoever.
Right, yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
huge nerf to the fight. Same with Soulrender, like that 17% HP nerf, not quite made up for by domination sets, but pretty close. And
Yeah.
we saw that as well on Painsmith a little bit, where Painsmith's also tuned fairly high, although Painsmith has other issues that we will talk about in a little bit.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely I feel that. Which it'll make farm maybe slightly interesting,
Yeah,
but yeah, yeah, definitely a little higher in terms of the tuning and difficulty
yeah.
than some of the early Sanctum bosses. So the next boss was Remnant of Ner'zhul, which didn't really go through. I don't think they got any changes to this fight this week.
I
Not
don't
that I
think it.
remember.
I don't think it needs them honestly.
No.
I have not done my mythic prep for this yet. I do know there are some guilds that were doing like the mass dispel and grip one
Hmm.
strategy for dealing with malevolence, because the knockbacks actually don't stack in magnitude. It just knocks you back and then knocks you back again and replaces the first one if you get knocked back twice.
Hmm.
Um, so you can mass dispel one and have the priest like spam life grip on the one that's farther away, and they'll get gripped back.
Yep.
Um, you can also, I'm like fairly sure there are kills out there where they're just doing the like get knocked to one side, get knocked back to the other. That one's
Yeah.
got a different kind of execution challenge where it's like more distributed across the raid as opposed to just like the priest has to do this exactly right or someone dies.
Yeah. So it's definitely from a difficulty perspective, I think the biggest thing is just that it's a lot more damage, a lot
Yeah.
more swirlies drop, and then there's something with the orbs. I forget what it is. But I think the orb damage while they're out is much higher. So it's really just like a more difficult
I think you
execution
get
fight.
more orbs because I like on heroic
Okay.
you would do eventually get double orb spawns, but it's like 3/4 of the way through the fight. You're
Yeah.
gonna start getting double orb spawns on Mythic Ner'zhul like almost instantly, which
Yeah,
of
and there's
course
like a
doubles
piece.
the damage you take from them, right?
Right, yeah, and there's also, like, his helmet, I think it is, when you break part of his armor off, becomes active and starts doing the tank frontals too, or, like,
Yes,
some sort of
that's super
spray.
dangerous. You got to be
Yeah,
careful about not doing the knockback in the middle of that because if you
mhm,
do and you hit the entire raid with the double tank frontal, they will die.
right. Yeah. Yeah, so there's all that. I know that, like, that definitely probably becomes the 5th boss you kill. It is a step up, I think, from Soulrender just in terms of difficulty and sort of execution.
Yeah,
Um, there's also a space issue too, I forgot. Whenever you do the dispels, I think the
yeah,
individuals leave puddles. So it ended up being a space issue. But yeah, uh, I think Limit and Echo both spent more time here than they did on Soul Render, at least post nerf Soul Render. And yeah, a lot of guilds went to Soul Render first as their 4th kill. So
yeah,
Ner'zhul
yep,
seems fun. The bounce mechanic's cool. I like the dispel timing.
yeah,
I'm still nervous, like for like world first kill's not an issue. For my guild, it's gonna be like, please just go to the right spot. Like for the love
yeah,
of God, walk where you need to walk. Whoever gets the debuff, please do that, and then I will dispel you. And then I always have to
yeah.
watch my shaman who loves to dispel the minute a debuff goes out. So we'll
Yes.
probably ask him to take dispel off his bars. So
It's gonna be very interesting. I do think this is going to be another boss that benefits a lot from, you know, getting domination set bonuses basically,
yeah.
because the space constraints from the malevolence puddle are going to be much less constraining with an extra 10 to 15% raid DPS in
Hmm.
a week or two. So that's going to be something where like right now the guilds that are killing it might need to do the double dispel in order to manage the puddles basically. Whereas in 2 weeks we're just going to kill it quickly enough that it's not a problem.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. That is true. Um, well, cool. So then we go from there to probably the second hardest boss in the instance at this
Yeah,
point,
I think that's
uh,
correct.
which is Painsmith, where both Limit, Echo, pretty much everyone has spent outside of Sylvanas the most time on,
Yeah,
because it's actually crazy
insane.
from an intermission perspective. So just to lay the land, like with Painsmith, right? Everything still happens pretty regularly. He still throws his weapons out. You still get the knockout chains. You still got to kill the spike balls that roll out. The one difference there is that whenever he throws his weapon and does that ability, anyone with the spinny chains on them also shoots out spikes,
Yeah,
basically in a cross pattern from
yeah,
them. So north, south, east, west. So you have to sort of make sure they stand in a particular area to not hit the raid with that. That's fairly simple to do just based on like markers and things like that on the ground. The spikes also one shot if they hit you.
yes.
So that's a big thing along with the spike balls. And the spikes one shotting is a huge thing when we talk about the intermission, which is just on crack, it feels like. So
Yeah. So there's
the
two main
oh, sorry.
changes, right? That
Yeah.
I'm aware of at least. One is that there is a ball wave that got hot fixed into the boss on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Before so this is before any guild had pulled it, of course. But Tuesday, as the raid was unlocking, we got a hot fix that added a wave of spiked balls to the intermission. And the way it works in actuality is that this spike ball wave actually has it always moves like perpendicular to the spike waves that are coming towards you in the intermission, and there's always gaps. It's every other space is open. So
Yep.
you don't have to kill the balls, it's just an extra thing to dodge while you dodge the traps. The other thing, which I think is honestly unforgivable, I think this is, I'm curious to hear what you think about. Well, I think this is the dumbest shit they've done on the boss in a long time. There is a wave of spikes in the intermission that has no gaps.
Yep.
So most people are probably familiar at this point with phase one or phase 2 and 3 of Painsmith, where you've got a wave of spikes coming towards you, and the way you deal with it, it also has no gaps. The way you deal with it is you plant next to it, wait for the spikes to come up, and as soon as they hit the apex of their movement, you just move into that square, and that is plenty of time for you to get across it and not get hit, and that's fine. The spikes in the intermission move faster. You cannot do that. You will die. Even on heroic, you'll get hit. You might not die, but you will at least get hit and get stunned by the spikes. So on Mythic, again, with no gap in the spikes, there is no way to get across outside of movement abilities or Warlock gateways placed on the very edge of the platform.
Not anymore.
Oh,
So
not
that's
anymore.
one.
Right, there's a
That's they did.
hotfix.
They did make a hot fix. So yeah. So you're right. Previously, if you warlock gated over the spikes, you could get hit by them.
Yes.
So they did make a hotfix change there, where if you're inside the warlock gate flying, you won't get hit by any of the spikes on the ground. Which I think if they did not make that change, I would agree with you that
Yeah.
that this is sort of a ridiculous mechanic. You basically require people to have some sort of blink like ability, yeah, whether that's actual blink, Door of Shadows, the Night Fae Soul Shape
Right.
one, or some sort of immunity like Bop, Turtle worked, the Shield the Paladin bubble,
Yeah.
things like that would
I'm just
also
like
work.
the original version of this fight, the comp requirement for the intermission is ridiculous.
So
Like
good.
I would not want to be, trying to put together comps for our guild and be like, okay, we have to make sure that every single person in the raid has a immunity or movement ability. They can cross the spikes because things like heroic leap would not work. That will not get you across the spikes in one piece consistently.
Mhm.
So it has to be an actual blink. So we're looking at like, okay, who's Night Fae, who's Venthyr. Mages are automatically good because they are Night Fae, have a blink themselves and an immunity, so they're like triple good. But
Yeah.
then there's other classes like Monk is fine because we've got Transcendence. But then what does a
Mhm.
Shaman do?
The
Shaman
Goblin.
Goblin doesn't work consistently.
If you jump off the edge, turn
Oh,
around and
okay.
jump back
Yeah.
on, you can do it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll maybe do that a couple times with
So
limit, but yeah.
yeah, Hunter can do the same thing, jump off, disengage back on.
Yep.
But that's the kind of thing where like it's such an insane requirement for a
Oh yeah.
it's not even like the most infamous one that people are familiar with. I think is Blast Furnace, which I didn't do the boss and I'm still familiar with it, where you had to have a priest, specifically a
Yep.
priest, to do a mind control, but you only needed one, as long as they didn't die. You needed
Yeah.
one, they had to be there. But if you got to the boss later, you could have someone's trash priest alt come in there because all they needed to do is mind control. The other 19 people could do the rest of the fight.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean you also had that requirement even last tier. Like you had N'Zoth with the immunity requirement.
That was also fairly egregious, but like not as egregious as this, I don't think.
I think the only reason you're saying so my point would be the only reason that N'Zoth was okay is that the classes that had immunities were good. If mages
Mm,
were not good or you had to
you
bring a
also needed
subclass.
fewer.
That's true. That's
That's
you
the
do need
other
the
thing
whole
because
race to
you
go.
also
Yeah.
like you need a lot of immunities for Guardian, for
Yeah.
the way people are doing it right now, and that's not as problematic. The other thing as well is that the timers on N'Zoth, for example, are very static. So you could map out exactly like, okay, we use these 3 immunities here, these 3 here, these 3 here, these 3 here, and it will always work. With Painsmith, the timing between intermissions depends on how quickly you damage the boss.
Yeah, that's true.
So, for example, if you
That's
only
true.
have a certain number of bops that you're using to cross the spike wave, you just have to hold DPS until they are off of cooldown so that you can do it again.
That is true. Yeah, no, and I would yeah, so I was on I'd be on your side. Like I'm
Right.
on your side in terms
Now
of
that they've done the hotfix, though, I think it's a lot less bad. Like the
yeah.
hotfix makes it a lot more reasonable.
Now you just need one warlock,
You
right?
need a
And the
warlock, which, let's be honest, you've needed a warlock in your raid for a long time.
yeah, and they've been fine. I think Blizzard. I don't like a lot of people point to maybe a couple years ago when they were like, bring the player, not the class, or even when 10-man raiding was a thing, they made a couple of statements about how they can't expect raid teams to have certain classes in their raid, right? Because
Yeah.
of those things. I think with this being Mythic, being one raid size, expecting you to have a certain class is fine.
Yes,
So
I
like
agree.
expecting to have a warlock, fine requirement. I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
Um,
like straight up, if you're trying to do CE rating and you don't have a warlock, you need to stop, and either someone needs to reroll to a warlock,
yeah,
or you need to recruit one,
yeah.
because not like raiding without health stones or summoning portals is honestly throwing.
Yeah, it's awful. But no, so I mean, Painsmith in general, like not so we're just talking about the intermission, which is the craziest part. But
Hmm.
even beyond that, like the requirements in the actual phases, like the positioning requirements about like how you move through balls, where you need to go, where the safe spots are. Because again, like the fact that people still get those chains around them. Whenever the tank mechanic goes out, they still do the perpendicular spikes everywhere. Like there's still a lot of other
There's a
stuff going on. There's still the
lot.
traps are still there. So I think in terms of like difficulty, a lot of people are sort of comparing this to the boss from HFC,
Gorefiend.
uh, Gorfiend, as sort of the wall,
Yeah.
right? The mid tier wall, which I think in terms of like the pacing from an instance, I actually like that more. Like I'm not a huge like the fact that there's like a linear curve, which I mean I think Sanctum had this for the most part of like a very linear curve
Nathri, you mean?
or sorry, Nathria, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Nathria had this in terms of a very linear curve, which was like it was okay, but it's one of those things where you're just like, well, this boss is going to be 50 pulls, next boss 75, next boss 100, and sort of like a slow
yeah,
grind up. Where like I'm fine if it's like hard, 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 peak, next to easy, get the time off, get some more gear, and then like the final push for like maybe the final three is sort of
yeah,
the mountain climb. Like I think in terms of difficulty, I much prefer that
yeah.
than like the slow climb. So in terms of the fight being hard, I'm okay with. Why it's hard though, I'm not really excited about this.
This is another
Like,
fight as well where actually latency is a really big factor, um,
yeah.
because of how precise the timing is for crossing spikes outside of the intermission.
Hmm.
Where Limit actually dealt quite a bit with people being desynced or just having slightly jittery latency and just getting one shot to spikes. And like you can only have that happen so many times before it's just a wipe because you can't do the fight with two people dead.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a DK that's gonna have this issue. Like he for whatever reason, he any sort of moving thing in an instance desyncs for him. So he couldn't do Talic with us
Oh man.
because, or not that he couldn't do it. It was just he died every attempt because the elevator would desync. So he would basically on his screen he'd be like this high in the air, but the actual elevator was about to hit the ground. So he'd be like all of a sudden it would just despawn and he'd fall to his death. And he'd have to like pre-move lasers because like he didn't know where he was actually his player was positioned versus client.
That's
Um,
awful. Yeah.
yeah, he sees it even like the elevators in Sanctum today. Like he has problems with like
I
the
have problems
walk
with the
on one.
elevators in not actually in Sanctum, but I've had them in multiple previous raids where my elevator position is different from everyone else's.
Yeah.
Nihilotha was very bad about that for me.
Yeah, so I mean, he's nervous about doing Painsmith with us just because like he'll even see it now where like he'll be like he'll show clips and he'll be like, I was literally 2 squares away from the spike wall and it killed me. He's like, I don't know where I can stand and not die. So
Yeah.
he's like, I just not do any damage and live, but that doesn't particularly help too
Yeah,
much.
so
So
I'm not looking forward to that aspect of the boss because we are going to end up with people, or we are almost certainly going to end up with people that are in that exact same position.
yeah,
It is also kind of funny that EU actually had an advantage there because internet in the EU is so consistently better than in the United States
yeah,
that they all had lower, more consistent latency to the EU server they were playing on
yeah.
than people in the United States, even people playing from the like limit, enclave or wherever they are.
Yeah, Complexity Gaming Complex, whatever it is,
Yeah.
GameStop Performance Center. Yeah, so I mean, that'll be another issue with this boss, but I think it's ultimately like I think the I'm still excited about it being so hard. I'm so excited that being hard in the middle of an instance so you can look
This
forward to
is
it.
So this is the last time we had a boss like this was Mistress Sajin, right? Where like
Yeah, it's the other
Mistress
one. Yeah,
Sajin was like noticeably harder than the next couple after her, and then you had Fallen Avatar.
yeah, yeah.
Which I didn't raid Mythic that tier. That is a tier before I started doing CE rating. So this is gonna be the first time for me doing a tier that doesn't have that like linear ramp up in difficulty, which is gonna make it very interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll have to definitely talk about that because I think at least in my point of view, it makes the progression easier because you're not doing that whole thing where you farm the first boss enough and then it's just extending until you kill the last guy. Because
yeah,
like the incremental gear you get from like killing Sludge Fist for the third or fourth time is like not worth the time it takes to clear the whole instance of that
yeah.
to there, right? Um but yeah, I mean, it'll hopefully you enjoy. Hopefully it's cool. Hopefully you like it. I don't know. I hope they do
I
more of this. Is the only reason I hope you like it, right? So we can be like, yeah, this is a good
I,
idea.
I actually so I was actually really not looking forward to Painsmith after doing it on PTR. Like super
Mhm.
not into it. First week heroic, I actually really enjoyed the boss. I think it's a very cool boss. It's got some neat overlaps, but the overlaps are very predictable. Um,
Mhm.
and
Oh yeah, we
very
can
so
talk.
you could plan it out, know what to do, and then it's really just a very heavy execution fight, which I think is a lot of fun. On Tuesday on heroic they changed all the timers, which was super dumb. They also added in something that's supposed to be protection against having traps spawn at the very beginning of the intermission,
Mhm.
because if that happens you just die. You can't break them all in time before the spikes break them for you. um
It's annoying. It's
So
awful.
there's
It's
two changes that they made, right? The first off, they changed basically the order of when like there's this overlap of balls and spikes from the tank that comes out. They changed the order of that, so now like the balls spawn immediately after spikes come out. So the tank has to like adjust their position very slightly to not get hit by the balls. It's very annoying, but fairly minor. That's more of an annoying thing. The other bigger change is that they changed the timing of traps and spikes to I don't know the best way to do this now. We were having people cross the spikes to drop the traps.
the
And
best way.
on heroic, we our main raid is at the point where we just only get one set of traps per phase. Like phase 1 we get none, phase 2 and phase 3 we get one set, and so that's fairly easy. Turns out if you get a second set of traps in a phase, which we got in sales yesterday, um, the timing on them is slightly different, and the spikes have to be closer so that people can cross them.
So
Uh,
it's not yeah, so that's and then if you get a third, because we were in phase 3, we ended up getting a third set of traps. You actually don't have enough time to get on the other side of the spikes from the tank.
yeah,
Because literally the tank mechanic goes off as the spike or as the traps drop.
yeah,
So we wiped to that once because we were doing our normal like, all right, go over the traps, and then like, oh my god, I'm next to the spikes. As
yeah,
my trap is dropping, I can't get over it in time. What yeah. So eh, I'm not a fan of the new timings. I think it causes more what like we didn't wipe to this, but we had people with traps like like mess up crossing the spikes and then getting hit by them,
yeah.
almost dying.
But I mean, so
So
basically, if you have good raid DPS and your DPS stay alive, I do think it actually ended up being easier once you know
yeah,
the like get over the spikes. Because as long as you don't get that second trap wave in the face, it's totally fine.
yeah,
But once you get to the second or the third, it's very screwed up.
yeah.
And also, there's an extra fun thing. So I mentioned the protection, so you don't get spikes or traps spawning in the middle or at the start of the intermission. So once the
Hmm.
boss hits, the boss transitions to the intermission at 70 and 40%. Once you hit 72% and 42%, traps won't spawn anymore. Except if the boss has the traps queued up while he's casting something else like a tank mechanic, a long cast, and you push him below 40%, for example, during the cast, he will cast traps.
Oh, he still does it. Oh
He still does
god.
it. We wiped 3 times to that before we just like because we were trying to beat it. Like we had people dead, so we're like,
Yeah.
okay, we're just gonna try and beat it. And it turns out that like we didn't have to just push our phase 2 timer down by like 5 seconds. We need to do it by like 20 seconds so that we would entirely skip the tank mechanic in order to actually push past it. So more gear will do it. Right now, what we had to do is just stop DPS. so
Oh
that
Jesus.
because it was so funny. We had to stop DPS. We were planning to wait for the traps to come out, so we stopped. He did the tank mechanic. Nothing happened. He just didn't do the traps,
Yeah.
and then we just pushed him, and it was fine.
Gosh.
So that's annoying. I've got a weak aura now that tells me how long it's going to be until we hit that threshold, so I know whether to call a push or a stop. Fun,
Yeah,
fun,
yeah.
fun, fun.
Yeah, that does not sound fun at all. I'll be completely honest with you. That sounds rough. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, Painsmith seems like a fun time. I think playing Monk will be fun on it. So,
Hmm.
like the movement and stuff will be cool.
Can't wait to roll
Um,
off the edge on Mythic. I've already done it on
yeah,
Heroic.
I will. I will. I have not rolled off yet, but I have been close. I've
Our
definitely done the thing where I.
ours our second pull ever. I was running out to drop off the tank mechanic, and I rolled, and I got a little lag spike, and I just kept rolling. You know how that goes.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and so that, of course, didn't just kill me because I was running out the tank mechanic. And the way it works now is if you're off the edge when the tank mechanic lands, it hits the entire platform with spikes.
Oh, okay.
So you can't, like, on the first PTR, there was a people were like jumping off and then transcending back on so that there were no spikes.
Oh, wow.
Um, don't do that. But also be very careful rolling with the tank mechanic because if you go off, the raid dies.
That's crazy. Yeah, I will not. I will keep. Well, I'm not going to tank this tier. I'll keep that in mind. But yeah, that sounds. Yeah, sounds not good.
But that's more of
Um.
just like that was very funny because it was our second pull ever, and I have the clip
Yeah.
showing that I did roll too far. Like I rolled farther than
Yeah.
roll is supposed to go, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah. I
was
did. I did the thing where like I instinctively whenever I roll I jump right at the end. So I did the whole like roll jump right at the end and like almost just jump straight off because I
yep.
still have that forward momentum. But yeah I've not rolled off just yet. So
So
um
yeah, I guess to wrap up the Painsmith discussion, I don't know what I expect from this boss anymore. This is part of the reason I was talking before the stream. Like this tier, this race has defied all expectations. Between
yeah
last week, heroic Sylvanas being so hard, this week, Eye of the Jailer unexpectedly being, quite a
yeah
DPS check. Painsmith just coming out of nowhere and
oh yeah
smashing people. Um, and then they got to
we get
Guardian
the
of the
next
First
three
ones, and what was it? 7 pulls for Echo,
7 for them 20-ish for limit.
and then
It was
so
6 healed. The patchwork fight was 6 healed.
yeah, they 6 healed it. They used immunes to soak the obliterates. And the reason that they 6 healed a patchwork fight is because the enrage actually depends on how many purging protocol casts that go off. You basically get, is it 3 sets of them before the final phase? And if you bring more healers, you can do more purging protocol casts, which works out in this case to an extra about 30 seconds of DPS on the boss. And so
Right.
that, it turns out, is worth bringing a 6th healer in a 3rd Holy Paladin.
Well, I
Then,
think it particularly means you can bring a 3rd Holy Paladin versus
yeah.
an actual any 6th healer. Yeah.
They also had, I don't know if you were watching the healing meters, they had a Protection Paladin, of course, on the fight, pressing lots of wogs, very briefly, rank 1 HPS on the fight,
Yep.
up until the first raid damage event went out. That was fun. Um, and then, of course, the either Brewmaster or Blood DK, depending on what guild, tanks the fight or tanks the boss for the majority of the fight, and the Prot Paladin just does damage and healing, and then does the tank mechanic
Yeah, or you could be BDGG and solo
and
tank it
solo tank it with a Prot
with a paladin.
Paladin.
Yeah.
Lincoln is gonna have my head for saying that Prot Paladin was gonna be too squishy, because that's
Yeah.
nuts. That boss hits so hard that we actually, so normally for SimC, the default enemy is based on the hardest hitting boss in the raid. But
Yeah.
Guardian hits so much harder than anything else. Like he's literally double the auto attack damage of the next highest boss.
That's funny.
So we're actually changing it so it doesn't hit as hard because it's making Brewmaster Sims bad because it's putting too much damage into Invoke Niuzao.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
But yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, that's yeah, that fight push out. I mean, I'm not gonna say pushover. I think it needs a very right now in the current gear needs a very specific actually healing
Yes.
composition, right? Like you can't do this fight with any healers. Like I think it's got to be multiple holy paladins and multiple disc priests
Yep.
to make it work, just to make the damage check, right?
Yeah, I
Because
think Limit did 2 disc, 3 Holy Paladin, and a Resto Shaman. I think that or three
restoration.
disc and 2 Holy Paladins and the Resto Shaman. But they had the one Resto Shaman in there. Um,
Yep. From
and
80, yeah.
then PDGG, the absolute mad lads. 1 tank, 5 healers.
Yeah.
Crazy. And of course,
Yeah.
this is another boss where when we have the Sanctum of Domination sets, we're not going to need to 6 heal this boss because we can basically the extra raid damage from that is going to mean that bringing in extra DPS and just doing 1 fewer purging protocol in each set is
Yeah.
going to be the way to go.
Yeah. You'll be able instead of doing I think most of they all did what, 4 each? 4
So
protocols, I think
they
each?
had 3 cats go off and brought it in during the 4.
Okay, yeah, so you'll be able to just take 2 hits and then be fine,
Yeah,
across the board, yeah. Which the first hit generally isn't deadly, it's always gonna be the second one, so, I mean,
yeah.
you only need cooldowns for the second hits, which will be nice. But yeah, so that's Guardian, not much to say, really fell over. And then you get to Fatescribe, which started a little this is, I think, the only boss that has generated any sort of drama. But yeah, so
Are you
Fatescribe
sure about that? Because we haven't hit KT yet.
it's true, we gotta talk about KT, but I think uh, Fatescribe, of course, is the rune boss. The mythic mechanic, just to sort of talk about this, is like in whenever you activate one of the runes to run them around the room, there is now a beam that goes from wherever the rune is to the center. So it basically sort of cuts off and moves as you move the rune. So it's basically meant to be like you have to sort of maybe stop one rune, let another rune cross over, run around, and then get that rune back, like moving the next rune, whatever it ends up being, and you got to make them go counterclockwise, clockwise, all this stuff. Super, super complicated. Unless you're limit and you just say, we'll just make them all go left.
Yeah.
Take one person, they'll all go left. There's plenty of
This
time
works
for
on
this to
heroic
happen.
too, by the way, and I think is honestly probably the easier strategy for heroic.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that wiped us a bunch on Fatescribe is people being like, "Oh, it's slightly closer to go counterclockwise. I need to call for a backup." And by the time the backup actually gets there, you could have just
You're
gone the
just
other
gone.
way and gotten there faster.
Yeah,
So
you
it
could have
turns
just
out
gone.
that there's virtually nowhere that it can spawn that it's impossible to go clockwise around.
Yeah.
You have enough
Eh,
time as long as you get there right as it turns.
right.
And
And
there's a
that,
little
and
bit of
however, that
leeway.
yeah, but that only works up to the final phase. So,
Yeah.
because the only reason is the final phase is a shorter timer before the
Yes.
explosion goes off. But yeah, any of the intermission phases, just jump on one person each ring, have them run around. So there was a fun little tweet, couple little tweets back and forth between the Echo and Limit guys. Old Echo Lorgok, a little upset at how simple this was. And yeah, but I mean, I think Limit killed it sub 30-ish, or no, it was like
Yeah.
a 60-ish pull boss, I think, at the end of the day. Or no, that was KT.
That
So it
was
was, yeah, it
KT.
was like, yeah, it was super low from a pull count perspective. I think Echo killed it in 12, I want to say, or something ridiculously low after they saw Limit do it. So
Yeah.
I mean, this boss had potential, I think, to be really interesting. But yeah, just go left.
Just
And
go
then the actually
left.
the other thing too is, I don't know if you noticed this, but when Limit did it in the final phase, they didn't care about the beams because there wasn't the intermission damage going off.
Oh,
You
they
could
just
just
walked
have
through the
people run
beams.
through the beams because the damage wasn't high enough and just heal them. So when they killed it, they
Nice.
were just like, just run quickest way, get it done. Don't care about beams. Go through them. You'll have a healer, like a paladin or something was healing
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah,
um,
we wiped a bunch on Fatescribe last week to the intermission ones from people trying to overthink the
yeah,
intermission rings. I think it is going to be a lot easier for a typical guild to just simplify the mechanic as much as possible and rely on
yeah,
people getting there quickly. Because honestly, we actually had people get to their runes very quickly, very consistently. It's just that they would then like sit there waiting for backup, right? And
yeah.
if you
I mean,
just say just never call for backup in the intermission, just never do it. Always just get on your rune and go. There are going to
yeah,
be sometimes maybe that someone gets there too slow, the rune is too far, and you just die. But I
right.
think for the most part, it's going to be the better strategy for most guilds.
Yeah, yeah, so it makes it definitely fun, I'll say. Um, so yeah, so that was sort of Fate's Scribe, and again, you're gonna hear a theme here, disappointing, I think, in terms of, like, they could have shortened the timer in the intermission, so you had to go the opposite direction, make it a
Yeah.
little bit more interesting there.
Which
But
I think for Limit and Echo they could have done that. I think for the rest of the world, anybody outside the top 10, that just makes the boss such a wall. Because the thing
yeah,
that the top 10 guilds have that, my, world rank 400 something guild doesn't have is extremely good coordination in
yeah,
fight. Like we plan things out, but when we have the dynamic mechanics like that assign people for us, having unless there's a weak aura that does all the assignments for you and figures it all out, right? It's very difficult for us to consistently execute those high coordination mechanics. And
right,
it would
yeah,
be doable, but our pull count would be much higher than it would be for Limit and Echo as compared to something like Guardian, where when we get to Guardian, we might not do it in 7 pulls, but it's not going to be 100 pulls.
right, yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think, yeah, I get the coordination aspect of it. I think it just ends up being a slightly harder version of its heroic
Yeah.
fight, right? Which it
So
just does a little
here's
bit
a
more
question.
damage.
There's a lot of speculation that they are going to hotfix some of these bosses to make you do the mechanics the intended way, because so many of these bosses later on in the instance, we'll get to KT in a second, because that's one too,
Yeah,
where people just ignored mechanics, right?
yeah.
Do you think they're going to do that?
Do I think they're gonna do that? I no. I mean,
I agree
like,
with that. I don't think they will.
I don't. I think they just take the L on it, right? Like,
Yeah.
they like.
I
I think
think
the.
oh,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. Go.
No, I was gonna say, I think to change it now just basically makes the fight different. Like, in the only instance I actually can think of this happening, well, not only instance, but the most recent one was Council of Blood,
Yeah.
where when Limit killed it, any guild who killed it the first week, the jump mechanic, I forget the name of it,
Yeah, yeah. Dancing
recital
Fever.
or fever, yeah, wasn't triggering correctly in week one of Mythic. So like there are some times where you got one fever, and other times where you got the
Yeah.
3 or 4 you were supposed to get, right?
Yeah.
So they hotfix that to be more consistent. Um, which I think is fine because like it happened a couple times. But I think for something like this, where like you set the mechanic, you set the numbers, like I don't think they change it. And I think
Yeah.
that if they do, it just the best skills in the world have already killed it. So now you're making them week two kill a harder version of the same boss, and you're sort of making everybody else kill a harder version of the boss. Like,
Yeah.
no offense, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want you to hotfix it once, then to just in like 3 or 4 months when you go through your nerfs to hotfix it again to bring it back to what the first guild whoever killed it, the version they
Yeah.
killed it as. So
The
yeah,
one boss I actually could see them hotfix buffing basically would be KT. Because KT got cheesed. Oh man. So this is something that worked on PTR and we bug reported during PTR testing, but didn't get fixed. If the tank dies when they get hit by the tank mechanic, the ads despawn.
right,
Um, but
right,
you combine that with the Fatescribe cheat death trinket, which, in contrast to regular cheat deaths, actually kills you, which usually is a downside because you lose threat, and that's not great.
right.
But if you're a DPS that taunted the boss for the tank mechanic with the cheat
So
death
good.
trinket on,
Hmm.
died so that they would despawn, and then use the cheat death trinket to revive yourself, everything's great. Losing threat's an upside.
Yeah. Yeah, which is just it's so funny that people like the actual treat yeah, the actual cheat death on this trinket sucks as a
Yeah.
tank trinket. Like as a tank cheat death, it's awful. But in this specific instance, it's like one of the best trinkets that could have ever come out of the raid, and it's hilarious that it's on the boss right before KT.
Yeah, it's like,
Like,
this happened especially in a lot of older games where you're getting to a boss room because there's a lot of ammo and you get the super powerful weapon to use on the boss and all that stuff
exactly.
immediately before it, and it's like unintentionally evoking that right here where like the Fate Scribe trinket is just the best thing in the world for this.
Yeah. It's just like it just pops out like, "Hey, you'll need me to kill this boss." Like the hook shot
Yes.
or like whatever ends up the boomerang in Zelda. You're like, "Yo, you're definitely gonna need this to kill the boss."
Yeah.
Which I just find hilarious. But yeah, I mean, KT, what a as a ultimate boss. I don't know. I mean, we can sort of talk about this maybe a little bit, but as a ultimate boss, it's bad. And I think it's bad not only because of this cheese, but I think they missed the mark across the board in terms of like DPS and just damage going out,
Yeah.
right? Like, because of the way the timings
So
work or
the
sorry.
yeah, I guess you're actually about to get to that, but there's a thing you can do where you basically make him skip a cast of the group damage soak, which does a lot of damage.
Mhm.
It's very dangerous, and so skipping it is very valuable. Basically, you just push the boss at times that make him not cast it one time. And so
Right.
because you push him, what, 3 times over the course of the fight, you skip
Mhm.
3 casts of this very high damage ability. And I don't know that that necessarily fixes it, but it does add a lot, especially as well, like, if people also had to be killing the tank ads, then, you know, the damage requirement from the DPS goes up then. There's also things like they were stacking, which this is a heroic strat as well, but you stack the Oblivion's echoes in the center, the back center of the room, basically, and just everybody, instead of using them to silence the tank ads, so then all of those ads spawn there, and you just have like a frost mage throw a frost orb on them that keeps them slowed while Starfall just kills them for you.
Yep.
Um, hashtag 3 Boomkin Club. Like,
Yep.
it's just going to be a non-mechanic for us. And so,
Yeah.
because I think the tank stuff despawning and the push timer shenanigans really undercut this boss because it just does so much to reduce the damage requirement and reduce the healing requirement.
Well, and the biggest thing with the healing requirement is because you can push you can put the boss under 5% and essentially reset a lot of the timers, right? Stopping the cast of the group wide damage, and then also it resets the timers on like shards and some other abilities too. Because I think they did that so you didn't get bad overlaps going into it, which
Yeah,
is a smart way to do it. But you could cheese it. Is that for the spikes that spawn, which do probably outside of the soak mechanic, do the
is
largest amount of raid wide damage. You can kill them all at the same time under every defensive cooldown you have. Hold the boss under 5%
so
for
that
enough
you
time.
skip the next.
Well,
Yeah.
no, not that you skip it, you hold it there under 5% so that you let your cooldowns reset. So the next
Oh,
time you go
okay.
through the next phase one piece, all your raid wide defensives are
Or
back
back
up and
up.
you just do the same thing.
Yeah.
Like that's the actual worst part is that they did something that they didn't do as a cool either. The cool is actually another example of this with the dispels you had to do.
Yeah.
That when you dispel would do raid wide damage. The problem is you could just under cooldowns mass it and it didn't do enough damage. Here's the very similar way is
Yeah.
not only do they not do enough damage to kill you if you pop all 5 or 6 at the same time, you also are not I'll say cheese the timers enough where, like, you only get 1 spikes a phase and you have all your defensive ups each time because you can elongate that second half of the phase.
Yeah. I
Um,
am curious. Would you rather this be an SLG style, like, random impossible overlaps because of push timers kind of thing?
no, I would wanted them to modify the ability, right? Make the
Yeah, okay,
dot
I
hit
think that's
harder.
fair. I think that's
Yeah,
fair.
like from a heal like if I look at this from a healing fight perspective, the soak being able to push fast and miss a soak mechanic, I'm fine. Like I think that's fair. Like, I'm
Okay.
fine with the way that the actual timers worked out and the fact that you could hold the boss under 5% for like an extra 10, 15 seconds so that next time you go through it, you have more time, right?
Yeah.
Basically elongating that and killing it or phasing it at the last possible second. And I'm fine that the timers reset when he's at low health because I think getting like a soak mechanic right as you're supposed to go into the
Yes.
intermission
Is
is
really
a
bad.
terrible overlap. Yeah. So I'm fine with that. I think the problem is that the abilities that are supposed to do damage don't do enough damage, right? Like the
Yeah.
spikes are supposed to be dangerous, and if you can just put the spikes with the little ads that spawn and AoE everything together, because then you get better damage, like just distribution, right? You kill little ads plus spikes plus
Yeah.
sitting under cooldowns. It's like at that point,
So,
it's like every 3 minute hit your raid wides.
yeah.
So
So I'm curious, maybe a fix to it would have been having ramping damage during phase one, so that if you just sat there with the boss below 5% waiting for your timers to line up, you would have eventually
mhm.
just died, so you needed to push the boss. You know, maybe something like that would have been ideal, so that you
Yeah.
couldn't
Give
do
him
that
like an
cheese.
aura.
Yeah.
Yeah, give him like an aura where like under 5% you had to basically push. But at that point,
Or even just like, during phase one, he just periodically like gains a stacking aura that's just doing more and more damage. And A, that makes Rested Druid and Mistweaver better.
yeah,
B, that
I
means
want
that
to.
you can't just sit there below 5%, because sitting there below 5%, means you've got this huge ticking raid damage going out.
Right, yeah.
And you really are pressuring your healers in a different way then that also wants cooldowns. So then,
Yeah.
like, I don't know that that's the right solution, but it's, there are ways they could approach this that don't necessarily put us in SLG territory. That
Yeah.
do make the fight basically cut off these cheeses. But also, this is with kind of post hoc knowledge of how people actually did the fight on live. And I know we
Right.
did find a tank cheese on PTR and did report it, and it didn't get fixed. I don't know that anybody was doing the holding CDs stuff on PTR. I kind of doubt it with only an hour of PTR time.
Yeah, I mean, like doing like the timing stuff would have been something that was never part of PTR. But I mean, the damage, like the dot damage and things like that, like Blizzard should have been able to see guilds killing a lot of those spikes all at once, trying to see like what a bunch of cooldowns does, because that's just a number. That's just a math
Yeah,
thing. Like
I,
that's
I
not
think
a
they expected.
tactics thing.
I think they expected that you wouldn't be able to put all 5 CDs in the same spot
Yeah,
every phase. I think that's really ultimately what it was. Because if all you have like if you have like an SLT and a barrier on it, you can do like 3. And when
yeah,
you're getting 5, that means you actually have to do the mechanic, right? You do your 3, then you do 2 more later,
yeah.
and that is a fairly like it's not an unusual mechanic, right? We've had stuff like that before.
Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, the pops and stuff
But
like that,
yeah,
or like not trying to overlap like dots and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, and that's what I'm saying is like they could have changed
yeah,
it. I mean,
absolutely,
even not increasing the initial damage, but making the dot tick harder.
yeah,
Meaning like you could only reasonably survive 3 dot like stacks of the dot before it became unmanageable,
yeah.
right? Even in cooldowns. And
So
yeah, I mean, they could have done a little bit about that. But yeah, I mean, what this is what 60 pulls for limit, but they did the majority of those while Echo slept, and then Echo came in and killed it in like sub 20,
yeah,
right?
yeah, something
Like
like that.
after
Let me
after
actually, I
seeing
have the
what limit.
Warcraft logs thing, Race to World First thing still open. I can actually check their pull counts, which is very cool. I think that's
Yeah,
actually so one of the best things I think for the rating community over the past couple of tiers is the rise of stuff like the Race to World First stuff that tells us pull counts of these high end guilds.
right.
And also stuff like not to like toot my own horn, but the prog stats stuff to tell us what higher end guilds and even mid tier guilds are doing for pull counts. I think is very good for setting reasonable expectations for people on like what's the pull counts looking like for this boss. Because
Yeah,
yeah, okay, Echo killed this maybe in 20 pulls, but you know then we can look at what's the number 8 guild doing it, and it's going to be a lot closer to what a typical guild actually does it in.
right. Or you can
Um,
do comparisons where it's like if Guardians and KT were killing similar pulls, and you just killed Guardians, you can expect similar number of pulls for KT, right? As a
yeah,
guild.
so Limit killed KT after 71 pulls. Echo killed KT after 22 pulls. And Echo actually got the kill an hour before Limit did. Although I don't, this doesn't tell me when they started, right?
It was in the morning. So Echo got it at the start of their day. So so Limit had gone to bed. So they killed it.
Yeah,
I think either as Limit was waking up because they did splits. I
gotcha.
think that day, but they had all the data from like Limit's first day on it. So
Yeah, and then like
um,
Fatescribe Echo 16 pulls.
because they just used the Limit strat. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Which is just it's yeah. Though I mean, I will tell you that from my perspective, and I know we're a little bit over, so I don't know if we get too much time to talk about
yeah,
Sylvanas, and she is still alive, unfortunately, as of we're talking about this. But I will say that like we talked a little bit about having like a mid-tier ramp and then like a little bit lower and then ramping to the final bosses, right? It's sort of
yeah,
like something that I enjoyed like from HFC was like that. And there was a I forget even like you talked about Mistress in Tomb of Sargeras, right? Like I like those type of instances. The problem is that like Fallen Avatar in Tome was not a 20 pull boss. Like it was a couple hundred, right? Um and so I think in this case they missed the mark in tuning after Painsmith. Like
yeah.
why like wildly missed the mark.
I
Like
think
not just
so.
slightly off, like
I think what they actually did on
universes.
like Guardian, Guardian would have been fine if, for example, on Guardian, he enrages after 6 Purging Protocol casts. So if you let him cast 6 times in a row, even if you have the healing CDs to somehow survive that,
Yeah.
he will enrage and he will start one-shotting everything. Um, if that were lower, so you couldn't do 3 casts,
Yeah.
then that would have ruled out this 6 heal strat. I don't know if it would have actually made it harder. It might have still died in 20 pulls or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think this had the level of flexibility where the top guilds literally just like did the math, figured out the way with the balanced the healing requirement and the damage requirement in such a way that they were like, yeah, we can do this.
Right. Yeah, which to me, like, Guardian seems like the simplest, like, just give him more health or give it more health, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
like, you give Guardian a couple million more health, it becomes a, like, 5 heal, like, tight DPS
I
check where you
actually
have everybody doing
don't know if
perfect.
it does, because
Well, I mean, like,
why
a
wouldn't
number that makes sense.
what if by so the most efficient way to add more DPS time to the boss is to add a healer with a raid CD, so you can take another purging protocol. Although I guess you're right, there is a point where you can no longer take another purging protocol, no matter what CDs you have.
Yeah.
So maybe the answer,
And that's what I'm
instead of
saying
adding
is,
more
like,
HP, was to increase the damage of purging protocol, so that on Mythic you can't take 3.
yeah, I mean, there's a yeah, definitely, there's a couple different
Yeah.
levers I
So
think they coulda
I think
used,
you're
but yeah, I
right.
think they just
There's
they
a
got those levers wrong,
yeah,
right?
I think you're right on that. I think you're right.
Yeah. At the end of the day, like, they just got them. They were off, right? And I
Yeah.
think that similarly, Fatescribe falls into a very another case where they just missed a timer edit, right? Like, that intermission timer is, instead of being, what is it, like 35 seconds right now or something like that? Make that 30 seconds and you immediately change the way the boss works,
Yeah.
right? Like, you immediately have to go the opposite direction. It's not a massive change in terms of actual time. It's just now you have to
Yeah.
contend with going
I
left and
actually,
right.
so I don't know if that actually, because when you're going counterclockwise and some of them are going clockwise, that means you lose some time from like having to step off and go around the beam, right? Does that
Yeah,
make
but
up for the
the
increase?
beam didn't kill you. So, like, the idea is, like, at
Okay,
that
yeah.
point, it's more of a, like, you just have to, there's a healing check now on certain people that are about to take a beam.
Okay.
Like, I'm basing on the beam not one-shotting you, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
um, or they could have done something where, like, yeah, there could have been other ways to
Yeah.
potentially do it,
I,
where, like,
I
you
I
had.
think ultimately though, your point is that they missed elements of tuning these that prevented these kind of cheeses.
Right, yeah.
And that's disappointing.
Yeah,
Um,
and that they
Side
become
note,
just. Oh, sorry.
Echo has 100 pulls on Sylvanas, and their best pull, Warcraft log shows it at 3.6%, which translates to
About a
something like
51 or 52%.
yeah, something like 55% HP or something like that. Or no, 51. Yeah, 51. Um, so 51.79 is the exact number. 100 pull.
Okay. Yeah, a
Although
lot lower than.
Denathrius after SLG took what, 300 pulls, and then
Yeah, it was a
Denathrius was
lot.
like 100 something. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
maybe
it looks
Painsmith
like
was
they're
the
getting
real end
close.
boss this tier.
Yeah, and it looks like they're gonna end up potentially. I mean, it's funny too. We talk a little bit about this live, right, with the poll counts. But I think if Limit and Echo got to Denathrius on Saturday versus on Monday, right,
Yeah,
of that race, I think Denathrius wouldn't have survived.
yeah,
I think the P3 damage check was tight, but I think it potentially wouldn't have survived the first reset. So,
yeah. And I
looks
think
like they're
that's what we're
close.
gonna see here. I think we're gonna see Limit and Echo both kill Sylvanas probably today, maybe tomorrow. I don't know when Echo stops raiding. Time
Yeah,
zones are hard, but I would not be surprised to see kills from both teams between today and tomorrow. And
yeah,
I, for one, after Painsmith, was bracing for this to be like a 2 or 3 week race to world first, because like Painsmith was tuned so high, I was like, oh my god, Guardian's gonna be like a 200 pull boss, and then they're gonna
yeah.
hit KT, and that's gonna be like a 300 pull boss, and they're just gonna need more gear in order to do it, and then they kill them in like 20 pulls.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I'm saying is, like, the second half of this instance is so disappointing in terms of just like what could have been, because I think it's not that the fights are inherently bad or that
Yeah,
they, like, the mechanics are bad or they're just unfun to play. I think it's just they missed the mark with the levers they had to tune it,
yeah.
right? And, like,
Which,
so
my personal 2 cents, I know we're running long, so this will be short,
yeah,
but I actually do like it being tuned a little bit lower than a lot of raids have been in the past in terms of like pull count required. I think this is too low. Like the last 3 bosses, or
oh
the
yeah,
penultimate 3 bosses, shouldn't be 20 pull bosses, even for the
yeah,
world first guilds. Maybe like the sixth boss in the instance, whatever, but not the ninth.
yeah. No, yeah, it's way too low.
Yeah, so that I am actually glad, because like when we were looking at Painsmith, I was like, I don't know how we're getting through this tier if Painsmith is 160 pulls for limit, and
Yeah.
then the other bosses after that, they've got to be harder, right? Like if they were harder than that, this tier would take us so long to get through.
Yeah, or
Um,
you'd see, like, you'd end up seeing, like, massive nerfs
right.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where I was initially thinking like they had to have like tuned this entire instance around the entire raid having domination sets or something, because that's gonna just make it like they're just betting on that making it so much easier for the rest of us that it's okay. But no. Like I'm okay with like there being bosses later in the tier that are like I think it's actually really good if the end boss is like sub 200. Like give me a nice 150 to 180 pulls on a boss like Denathrius. That's a lot of fun to do, and I'm
Yeah.
happy. None of this like 300 pulls nonsense.
Yeah. No, I
But
can. Yeah,
like
that
20
makes
pulls
sense.
is not enough.
No, I agree. I agree. So
But
so
then
yeah, so I think. Oh, sorry.
on the side note, I do think the KT will be more than 20 pulls for both of our guilds, unless it
Yes.
actually like unless it's. I think it's going to be more like a 50 pull boss for a lot of guilds,
Yeah.
but still, that's so much lower than any
Oh
other
yeah.
penultimate boss in recent memory, except for maybe Carapace. Although Blockade, I guess, was like that too, wasn't it? Although
Mm, no, I mean
BOD
like
had its own problems with
yeah, there was a
difficulty
lot
curve,
other issues with BOD. But
but
yeah, I mean
like,
I think
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, that boss was I think undertuned also in terms of where it's at. So
yeah. I'm
um
actually curious now. I'm gonna pull up stats for Nihilotha. What were people's pull counts on Carapace? 42 to 83 is the like
okay.
50. That's 50% of kills that fall within that range. Um, so that is actually like where I expect KT to fall.
Yeah,
We'll see.
interesting.
But
Well,
yeah,
cool. I mean, I think that's our sort of the first week of Mythic. I think it's been fun. Painsmith probably the only interesting boss. I mean, it's funny. The first half of the instance actually very interesting. Like I'm fine with all the bosses leading up to Painsmith, and then like after Painsmith, my interest sort of just dropped in terms of
I
like,
do think it's very funny that
uh,
like Limit had more pulls on Soulrender than they had on KT.
yeah, yeah. Then they probably had similar amounts of post nerf Soulrender pulls and KT. Like those were like,
Echo, not exactly, because they still ended up with like 70 pulls on KT or something.
yeah.
Whereas like post nerf
Oh yeah,
Soulrender,
sure, sure.
they were like one shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a very unpredictable
We just
week.
yeah, it's very weird tier, very weird tier. So that
But
is
yeah,
for sure.
I think that's gonna be the show today. We are running about 10 minutes over. Um,
It
Mostly
was a lot
because we
though.
spent a lot of time talking about domination sockets. Uh,
Yes.
but that is gonna be our show for today. Thank you all for listening. This show will be back on this channel next week. There will not be an audio version up right away because Peak of Serenity is actually down right now. Fingers crossed it should be back up soon. Um,
Soon.
but the audio version will be up when that's back up. But until then, if you like the show and you want to support it and all the other work that we do over at the Peak of Serenity, including guides and working on sims and things like that, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And as always, we welcome you to come and join in the different lounge channels in the Peak Discord. Always a great time, although I think Brew Lounge is filled with F1 posting right now, so
It's a
uh,
good time then.
maybe
It's the
not the best time.
only time Brew Lounge is a good time.
Uh, but yep, that's it for today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.